When I found my sister Noelle's hiking boots hanging from the helicopter's landing gear, I knew the search and rescue teams had been looking in all the wrong places. Those purple boots with the bright yellow laces that our grandmother Vera had given her were unmistakable. They were swaying gently in the Oregon mountain breeze, 20 feet off the ground, attached to a rusted military helicopter that had been swallowed by the forest decades ago. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Jake, and I'm a 28-year-old outdoor photographer who thought he knew these Cascade Mountains like the back of his hand. My sister Noelle is 26, an adventure blogger who runs a site called Wandering Wild, where she documents the hidden gems of the Pacific Northwest. 3 weeks ago, she disappeared on what should have been a routine 5-day solo camping trip to photograph waterfalls in a remote section of the range. The moment I saw those boots, my heart stopped. I had been searching for Noelle for 7 days straight, camping in the wilderness while official search and rescue teams combed through grid after grid of dense forest. My parents, Martha and David, were falling apart at home, calling me twice daily for updates I didn't have. The guilt was eating me alive because I was the one who had originally shown Noelle this area 2 summers ago during one of our sibling photography expeditions. Standing in that forest clearing, looking up at the massive helicopter that nature had been slowly claiming for what looked like 30 years, I felt like I was staring at a monument to everything I feared most. The aircraft sat at an angle on the mountainside, one landing skid hanging precariously over a steep ravine. Thick moss covered most of its olive-green paint, and Douglas fir saplings had grown up through gaps in its frame. But those boots, Noelle's boots, were definitely recent additions to this forgotten piece of military history. The forest around me was silent, except for the distant sound of a creak and the metallic creaking of the helicopter, swaying slightly in the wind. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my camera to document what I was seeing, knowing that in the next few minutes I might finally get the answers that had been tormenting my family for 3 weeks. The answers I wasn't sure I was ready to face. To understand why finding those boots hit me like a punch to the gut, you need to know about my relationship with Noelle. She's not just my little sister, she's been my best friend and adventure partner since we were kids growing up in Portland. While other siblings fought over toys or competed for attention, Noelle and I were planning our next expedition to some creek behind our house or convincing our parents to let us camp in the backyard. When we got older, our shared love of the outdoors turned into careers. I became a freelance outdoor photographer, and Noelle started her blog, Wandering Wild, which has over 200,000 followers who love her infectious enthusiasm for discovering hidden gems throughout the Pacific Northwest. We've collaborated on dozens of projects together. I provide the photos while she writes the stories that make people want to pack their bags and explore. Our parents, Martha and David, used to joke that they raised 2 kids who were allergic to staying indoors. Dad would say, "Most parents worry about their kids getting into trouble at parties. We worry about ours getting lost in the wilderness." He wasn't entirely wrong, but we were careful. We always filed trip plans, carried emergency equipment, and checked in regularly. That's why Noelle's disappearance made no sense. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning, Noelle kissed Mom goodbye and loaded her Subaru with camping gear for what should have been a routine 5-day solo trip. She was planning to hike to a series of waterfalls about 15 miles into the Cascade Wilderness, places she'd researched but never visited. Her blog post was going to be called Hidden Cascades, Oregon's Best-Kept Secrets. She had her route planned down to the mile, with GPS coordinates and daily check-in times. When she didn't call on Thursday evening as scheduled, we weren't immediately worried. Cell service in that area is spotty at best. But when Friday came and went with no contact, Dad drove to the trailhead and found her car still parked there, untouched. That's when we called the authorities. The search and rescue operation was massive. Teams of volunteers, trained search dogs, and even helicopter flyovers covered a 20-square-mile area around her intended route. They found nothing. Not a single trace of Noelle or her bright red jacket that she always wore for visibility. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't just sit at home waiting for updates that never came. After a week of official searches turned up nothing, I took leave from my photography assignments and drove back to the mountains with my own gear. My parents thought I was crazy, but I had to do something. I knew Noelle better than anyone. I knew how she thought, how she approached new terrain, and what might catch her eye enough to deviate from her planned route. For 7 days, I've been camping in different spots throughout the search area, methodically exploring every game trail, every creek bed, every ridge that the official teams might have missed. I've been following my gut more than any map, thinking like Noelle would think. She's always been drawn to the unexpected, the shot that nobody else thought to take. This morning, I woke up in my tent about 3 miles from where her car was parked and decided to follow a faint deer trail that headed northeast, away from her documented route. Something about it felt familiar, like a path she might have noticed, and decided to explore for just a few minutes. You know how it is when you're hiking and you see an interesting trail branching off, and you tell yourself you'll just follow it for 100 yards to see where it leads. The trail wound through dense stands of Douglas fir and cedar, climbing steadily up the mountainside. After about 2 miles of pushing through increasingly thick undergrowth, I caught a glint of something metallic through the trees ahead. At first, I thought it might be an old mining claim marker or maybe some discarded camping equipment. But as I forced my way through a tangle of salmonberry bushes and emerged into a small clearing, I realized I was looking at something much bigger and much older. The military helicopter sat there like a sleeping giant. Its olive green paint faded and streaked with rust, covered in decades of moss and lichen. Small trees had grown up through openings in its frame, and the whole aircraft tilted at a precarious angle on the steep slope. It looked like it had been there since the 1980s, maybe longer, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. That's when I looked up and saw them. Noelle's unmistakable purple hiking boots, hanging from the landing gear like some kind of twisted Christmas ornament, swaying gently in the mountain breeze. The moment I recognized those purple hiking boots, my knees nearly gave out. I had to grab onto a nearby tree to steady myself as the reality hit me like a freight train. Those weren't just any purple boots. They were the exact pair our grandmother Vera had special ordered for Noelle's 25th birthday last year, complete with the bright yellow replacement laces that Noelle had added because she said the original black ones were too boring. I called out her name, my voice cracking as it echoed through the forest. "Noelle! Noelle, are you here?" The only response was the wind whistling through the helicopter's broken windows and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The silence felt heavier than any sound could have been. As I moved closer to the helicopter, trying to process what I was seeing, I noticed other things that made my blood run cold. There was a piece of torn red fabric caught on a Douglas fir branch about 10 feet from the aircraft. I recognized it immediately as part of Noelle's jacket, the bright red REI shell that she wore on every hiking trip because it was visible from miles away. The fabric looked fresh, not weathered like it would be if it had been hanging there for weeks. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to document everything. Even though I knew there was no cell signal out here, the camera lens kept focusing and refocusing as I tried to capture evidence of what I was seeing. Noelle's blue Nalgene water bottle was lying in the dirt near the helicopter's tail rotor, its bright color standing out against the brown forest floor like a beacon. But it was the helicopter itself that really started to terrify me. This wasn't just some abandoned military aircraft that had been sitting here untouched for decades. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. There were fresh scratches on the exterior metal, gouges that cut through the rust and moss to reveal bright metal underneath. The helicopter's main door was hanging open, swaying slightly in the breeze, and I could see that someone had cleared debris away from the entrance. I forced myself to move closer, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The smell hit me first, a combination of old metal, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't identify that made my stomach churn. As I peered into the dark interior, I could make out shapes that didn't belong to the original aircraft. There was definitely someone's gear inside. The worst part was realizing how precarious the helicopter's position was. The entire aircraft was balanced on a steep slope, with the front landing gear dug into soft earth and the rear skid hanging out over what looked like a 50-foot drop into a rocky ravine. The whole structure groaned and shifted slightly as the wind picked up, making me wonder how long it had been sitting there in this unstable position. I walked around the perimeter, looking for any other clues, any sign of what might have happened to my sister. That's when I found the footprints. In a patch of soft earth near the helicopter's tail, there were clear boot prints that matched the size and tread pattern of the purple boots hanging above me. But there were other prints too, larger ones, and they were all mixed up together like there had been some kind of struggle. My mind started racing through terrible possibilities. Had Noelle encountered someone else out here? Someone who didn't want to be found? The helicopter would be perfect shelter for someone trying to stay hidden in the wilderness. Maybe she had discovered someone living here illegally, or worse, someone who was using this remote location for activities they didn't want witnessed. I realized I was completely alone out here, with no way to call for help and no backup plan if whoever had left those other footprints was still around. The nearest trail was 2 miles away through thick forest, and I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going this morning. If something happened to me out here, it could be days before anyone found me. But I couldn't leave. Not when I was this close to finding answers about what happened to Noelle. Those boots weren't hanging there by accident, and her gear wasn't scattered around this helicopter by chance. Something had happened here, something that the search and rescue teams had completely missed because they were looking in all the wrong places. I knew I had to look inside the helicopter, no matter how terrified I was of what I might find. I owed it to Noelle, and I owed it to my parents who were going out of their minds with worry back home. But as I approached the open door of the aircraft, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover something that would change everything. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at that open helicopter door, my mind cycling through every possible scenario of what I might find inside. But I knew I couldn't walk away. I couldn't go back to my parents and tell them I had found evidence of Noelle but was too scared to investigate. I couldn't live with myself knowing I had been this close to answers and turned back. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything methodically. I photographed the boots from multiple angles, the torn fabric on the tree branch, the water bottle, and the footprints in the soft earth. If something happened to me out here, at least there would be evidence for whoever found me later. The camera's memory card might be the only way my family would ever learn what happened to both of us. I approached the helicopter carefully, testing each step as I got closer to the unstable aircraft. The whole structure creaked ominously under my weight as I grabbed onto the doorframe. Up close, I could see that the interior was a maze of twisted metal, rotting fabric, and forest debris that had accumulated over decades. Shafts of sunlight filtering through holes in the fuselage created an eerie pattern of light and shadow inside the cabin. The smell was overwhelming now, a mixture of rust, mold, and decay that made me cover my nose with my shirt. But there was something else underneath those odors, something that didn't belong to an aircraft that had been abandoned for 30 years. It smelled like recent human habitation, like someone had been cooking food and living in this space. I turned on my phone's flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The pilot and co-pilot seats were still there, though the upholstery had long since rotted away, leaving only metal frames wrapped in tatters of olive green fabric. But in the back of the cabin, someone had clearly made modifications. There was a tarp stretched across one section, creating a makeshift room or shelter area. My heart was pounding as I climbed up into the helicopter, moving slowly to avoid putting too much weight in any one spot. The floor felt solid enough under the main structural beams, but I could see places where the metal had corroded through completely. One wrong step and I could fall through into whatever was beneath the aircraft. As I moved deeper into the cabin, my flashlight beam illuminated more of Noelle's belongings scattered throughout the space. Her leather journal was lying open on what looked like an improvised table made from an old ammunition crate. The pages were filled with her familiar handwriting, and I could see dates from just 2 weeks ago. My hands were shaking as I picked it up and saw her last entry. Day 8. Jake, if you're reading this, I'm trapped in the back section. I tried to climb out, but my leg is broken. The floor gave way when I was exploring. Please tell Mom and Dad I love them. That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from behind the tarp partition, so quiet I almost missed it over the sound of my own heartbeat. It sounded like breathing, slow and labored, but definitely human. I froze, listening intently, and heard it again. I found her camera next to the journal, its memory card still intact. Without thinking, I turned it on and scrolled through the last photos she had taken. They showed her approach to the helicopter, her excitement at discovering it, and then several shots of the interior before the timestamp suddenly jumped forward 8 days with shaky, desperate selfie videos where she was trying to document her situation for whoever might find her. The breathing sound came again, more distinct this time, and I realized it was coming from behind that tarp. My sister might still be alive. After 3 weeks of searching, after all the fear and desperation, she might actually be alive just 20 feet away from me. I called out softly, afraid that speaking too loudly might destabilize the helicopter further. "Noelle? Noelle, is that you?" The breathing paused, and then I heard the faintest whisper of a voice, so weak I couldn't make out words, but unmistakably female. I moved toward the tarp partition, my flashlight beam shaking as my hands trembled with a combination of hope and terror. Whatever I found behind that makeshift curtain was going to change everything, and I wasn't sure I was prepared for any of the possibilities racing through my mind. I pulled back the tarp with trembling hands, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal the most heartbreaking and miraculous sight of my life. There was Noelle, curled up in a makeshift sleeping area she had created from her camping gear, unconscious but breathing. Her face was gaunt and sunken, her lips cracked from dehydration, and her left leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle and crudely splinted with pieces of helicopter debris and her spare hiking socks. "Noelle," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. "Oh my God, Noelle, I'm here." I touched her shoulder gently, afraid she might be too fragile to handle even the slightest pressure. Her skin was cold and clammy, and I could see that she had lost a dangerous amount of weight. But she was alive, after 3 weeks of the worst nightmare my family had ever experienced. My sister was alive. Her eyelids fluttered at my touch, and she made a small sound somewhere between a moan and a sigh. I grabbed her water bottle from her pack and carefully lifted her head, dripping small amounts of water onto her lips. Her eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus in the dim light from my phone. "Jake?" Her voice was barely a whisper, so hoarse and weak that I had to lean close to hear her. "Is it really you?" "It's me, Noelle. It's really me." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face as 3 weeks of terror and desperation finally broke free. "I found you. I promised Mom and Dad I'd find you, and I did." She tried to sit up but winced in pain and fell back against her makeshift pillow. "I can't believe you're here." I kept writing in my journal every day, hoping someone would find it and know what happened to me. I never stopped believing you'd find me, Jake. I knew if anyone could figure out where I went, it would be you. As I gave her more water, she told me what happened in halting, whispered sentences. I was following some deer tracks off the main trail because I saw this amazing shot of them jumping over a fallen log. I wanted to get the perfect photo for my blog. When I found this helicopter, I climbed inside to explore it. You know me. I couldn't resist investigating something this incredible. She paused to catch her breath, and I could see how much effort it was taking for her to speak. I was taking photos and documenting everything when the floor gave way in the front section. The metal was so corroded that it couldn't support my weight. I fell through and landed back here, and my leg snapped on impact. I looked around and could see the hole in the helicopter's floor where she had fallen through, a jagged opening that dropped about 6 feet into this back compartment. It was like a trap that had been waiting decades for an unsuspecting victim. "I've been trapped here ever since," she continued. "I tried everything I could think of to get out. I used my trekking poles to try to pull myself up, but with my broken leg, I couldn't get the leverage I needed. The walls are too smooth and there's nothing solid to grab onto." She gestured weakly toward empty food packages scattered around her shelter. "I rationed everything I had, but I ran out of food 5 days ago. I've been surviving on rainwater that drips through the holes in the ceiling and a few huckleberries I could reach from my sleeping bag." "Jake," she said, grabbing my hand with surprising strength. "I was starting to think I was going to die in here. I kept telling myself that you were out there looking for me, but after 2 weeks with no sign of rescue, I started to lose hope. I wrote letters to everyone in my journal, just in case. I pulled out my emergency satellite communicator, the one device I had brought specifically for this search mission. "You're not going to die, Noelle. I'm calling for a helicopter rescue right now." I activated the emergency beacon and sent our GPS coordinates to the search and rescue center. "A medical helicopter will be here within 2 hours," I told her. "You're going home today. Mom and Dad are going to lose their minds with relief when they see you." Noelle smiled for the first time, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "I dreamed about this moment every single day. I dreamed about you finding me and taking me home. I just never imagined I'd look this terrible when it finally happened." "You look beautiful to me," I said, and I meant it. She was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen in my life. The medical helicopter arrived exactly 97 minutes after I sent the emergency signal, its rotors drowning out every other sound in the forest as it hovered above the clearing. Watching the rescue team rappel down to extract my sister was one of the most beautiful sights I had ever witnessed. The paramedics worked with incredible precision, stabilizing Noelle's broken leg and getting IV fluids into her dehydrated system before carefully lifting her out of the helicopter wreckage that had been her prison for 3 weeks. I rode with her in the medical helicopter, holding her hand as we flew toward the hospital in Portland. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight, but every time she opened her eyes, she would squeeze my hand and smile, as if she needed to keep confirming that this was real and not another one of her survival dreams. The reunion at the hospital was everything you would expect and more. When Mom and Dad saw Noelle being wheeled into the emergency room, they both broke down completely. Dad, who never cries, was sobbing so hard he could barely speak. Mom kept touching Noelle's face and saying, my baby," over and over again, until the nurses finally had to ask her to step back so they could work. "I can't believe you found her where all those search teams couldn't," Dad said to me later that evening as we sat in the hospital waiting room while Noelle was in surgery to repair her leg. 23 days of professional searchers covering every square mile of that wilderness. "And you found her by following your instincts." "I think I found her because I wasn't following the rules," I replied. The search teams were being methodical and logical, staying within the parameters of her planned route. But I was thinking like Noelle thinks, following the paths that would catch her photographer's eye, even if they didn't make sense on a map. Noelle spent 6 days in the hospital recovering from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and the surgery to repair her compound fracture, but her spirit was unbroken. On the 3rd day, she was already asking the nurses if she could borrow a laptop so she could start writing about her experience. "This is going to be the most incredible blog post ever," she told me with that familiar Noelle enthusiasm that no amount of trauma could diminish. She was right. When her story went live 6 weeks later, titled 21 Days in a Metal Tomb, How I Survived Being Trapped in an Abandoned Helicopter, it crashed her website from traffic overload within the first hour. The post was shared millions of times across social media, and within a month, she had book deals and documentary offers flooding in from around the world. The abandoned helicopter itself became something of a landmark after our story made national news. The Forest Service installed warning signs around it and began regular safety inspections to prevent anyone else from falling through the corroded floor. Tour groups now hike out to see Noelle's helicopter, though they're required to maintain a safe distance from the unstable aircraft. But the real impact of the experience wasn't the fame or the media attention. It was how it changed our understanding of resilience and the power of never giving up hope. Noelle's survival story became a symbol for people facing their own impossible situations. She receives hundreds of letters every month from people who tell her that reading about her 21-day ordeal helped them find the strength to persevere through their own challenges. For me, the experience taught me something profound about the difference between logic and intuition. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're willing to go beyond where everyone else is looking. To trust that quiet voice inside that tells you to try one more trail, explore one more ridge, follow one more hunch. Every time I go into the wilderness now, I think about how thin the line is between adventure and survival, between discovery and disaster. But I also know that love and determination can overcome impossible odds. Noelle's purple hiking boots still hang in our parents' garage right next to her new pair. She says they remind her that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us home. 6 months later, when Noelle won the National Outdoor Writers Association Award for her survival story, she dedicated it to my brother Jake, who proved that the best search and rescue equipment is a sibling who refuses to give up. I've never been prouder of anything in my life.